Stop the Week with Robert Robinson.
Hello. Our conversation this evening comes from Sarah Harrison, the novelist, Laurie Taylor, Professor of Sociology at York University, Stephen Oliver, the composer, and Nicholas Tucker, lecturer in psychology at Sussex University. We have music from Dillie Keane of Fascinating Aida. I heard Roy Jenkins use an old property box word. He spoke of the rodomontade of his political opponents. Fustian word reminds me of Donald Wolfett, but I have to admit I always thought it meant a sort of noisy, tub-thumping, wordy piece of invective or vituperation, and would have gone on thinking that's what it meant if one of my know-all friends hadn't officiously pointed out it meant a sort of noisy boasting or vaunting. From Orlando Furioso, said this chum of mine importantly. Yes, I said, trying to catch up a bit, by Tasso. Oh, no, he said, no, Ariosto. So I pulled a cigar out of his mouth and stuffed it up his nose. But there are words you've never doubted the meaning of, and all the time you'd got it wrong. I wonder if you have any examples yourself.
Well, the word I've got is desultory. Now, that sounds like a grey, rainy afternoon. In fact, as you of course know, it means intermittent, jumping around. And of course, if you understood Latin and Greek, which I, on the whole, don't, you'd know that. But I think it's one of those words where the air guides you towards, in fact, a correct definition. That's how it sounds. It's how it should be. It's rather like voracious, which sounds noisy, and has got nothing to do, really, with being greedy. And one more, solecism. Whenever I see that, I think that sounds very wise, because it sounds like a perfectly formed philosophical concept. The idea it actually means an error means nothing to me at all.
Yes, there are two that I've got which are rather like that it's like knowing that thing I before E except after C. I have to say to myself, as soon as the word occurs, no, it means the opposite. And when you say no, it means the opposite, suddenly you can't remember what the positive, what the negative was, and then you suddenly can't say it any longer because you've been thinking. Two such words are enervate, to weaken, which always sounds all the time, first time round, as though it must mean to exhilarate, to set on fire, to get going. And secondly, to secrete. I mean, to secrete must mean, surely, to hide away, whereas, of course, secrete in physiology means to produce by secretion, so that really if you secrete hormones, you actually produce them and send them out. So those two. The other thing I find that often if you don't use these words, if you don't say them, if you don't manage to put them into a sentence, it's really rather like the Reader's Digest business, and it pays to increase your word power. If you've never got enough confidence up, like words like syzygy, for example, I've always wanted to have an alternative word for symbiosis, because syzygy, and this is the first time I've said it, from now on I shall be able to say syzygy. This is a little therapeutic occasion for me. I've known that symbiosis, where it means things mutually feeding off each other, and syzygy refers to a simple relationship like that between the sun and the moon, which is not parasitic in that way.
But symbiosis, as I would care to pronounce it, but you probably got it right, that's one of the words I continually and continuously never know the meaning of, and the mere fact that you've said it, and were kind enough to offer the definition, won't make it's hearing people use it, me not using it, and being, every time I hear it, thinking it's an alien word, looking it up in the dictionary, it somehow assures that it will not stick, like a sheet of postage stamp. It won't do. It just will never stick.
The intelligence has a sort of purgative mechanism whereby words that are, ludicrously pretentious and useless like that don't stay in our memory. I looked up this morning the word that I brought to the table because I can neither pronounce nor define it, and it's hegemony or hegemony. Or I've no idea what I looked it up, and I've got it wrong again. I've no idea what it means, especially attached to the word cultural.
That is such a common one among social scientists who always want to use this word hegemonic, or that I can remember a cartoon which actually was simply about the pronunciation, the inability of people to manage it. And there is a woman academic standing there, and a male don is handing a bunch of flowers to her, and she is going, "Hegemonies, how lovely."
Yes, I confess to having a thing about certain words which seem to deny, or on the other hand, to emphasise something which I never knew existed in the first place. I find this terribly confusing, so that I'm sort of working back through them, trying to find what it is they're telling me I mustn't think. Things like ineffable, disingenuous, ineluctable, infarction, inchoate, and even preeminent. I mean, I know what it means when I hear it in a sentence, but I'm trying to sort of think my way back. Why should somebody be famous and then before famous? I haven't been looking these things up. They just are words. And what in heaven's name is prolix? It sounds worryingly like...
It tells you what it is.
It sounds worryingly like something that happens to ladies who carry heavy coal scuttles.
Yes,
I must say, if anyone tries to tell me what semiotic means, I'll punch them in the jaw. Because every time I see it, I've got it written down in front of me. It comes into my head as semi-idiotic. Yes. It's got something to do with being idiotic. And sometimes it has, I dare say, in a kind of arcane way. And arcane's not a bad word, too. I mean, pellucidly clear, and pellucidly's okay, except it might be a bit overripe.
But you see, you should allow the word semiotic, because semiotic is a very good description of one of the parameters of this particular conversation.
Parameter is what I'd like it.
I thought you liked it.
Yeah.
I haven't finished yet, Nicholas. Not for a moment. But it is, I mean, a reference. I mean, all the semiologists are always referring to the way in which these words are arbitrarily connected to what they mean. That language is essentially arbitrary, and that's the sort of starting point for semiology. So it's
good. I told you I'd punch you on the... You should told me to do that.
I just thought I'd got in.
I'll just catch you off guard one day.
Nicholas's turn. Bob is absolutely opposite. I said, just hold your ground and wait. Semiotics will go. So I hope will hermeneutics, a word I could never understand, but I'm glad to say its vogue is nearly over. But I would just say one thing, that we're always assuming that we should know the meanings of words. But, I mean, I really wonder, some of the words used in this way, are there as a little bit put-downs? And I remember a bit from Robert Graves' autobiography where Professor Edgeworth, a very pompous fellow of All Souls, said to T. Lawrence one day, he said, "Was it very colliginous in the metropolis?" Now, that's a sentence designed not to be understood, but of course T. Lawrence, being a genius, snapped back, "Somewhat colliginous, but not altogether inspissated."
No, that's really quite good. Don't believe it ever happened, but I mean, it could have. Esprit de what's the name, you know that. But I'm going to take us on to higher ground now, I think, with the motorbike. A campaign to make the motorbike socially acceptable. You may have heard of it. I don't know whether you have or not. Well, it sounds pretty perverse to me. The motorbike only exists because it's utterly unacceptable. But here's the Motorcycle Association, whoever they may be, stuffy sort of crowd, I shouldn't wonder, hoping to turn it into something the Queen Mother would roar up on to open the Chelsea Flower Show. Well, you can't have that. The motorbike's part of the history of disobedience. The very noise it makes is a technological raspberry, and it was specifically designed to have fists shaken at it. I could see the way things were going when I saw Ralph Richardson parking his latest motorbike, and it was so sleek you could tell it was trying not to be a motorbike. Richardson said he'd been on his way to the club that morning, pulled up at the traffic lights, and a lorry driver leant out of the cab and said, "How many miles have you done on that?" And Richardson looked at the dial and said 48, and the driver said, "About time you got a new one, isn't it?" Because, you see, the machine looked like a boudoir version of the real thing. It had had its teeth filed down. I mean, why do you think a motorbike's the one thing parents don't want you to have? Dangerous is what they always say, but the real reason they don't want you to have it is because it proclaims your autonomy. Yes. Now, Stephen, you look a bit of a ton-up boy to me. Snape Malting's chapter, of course. And being fond of a burn-up yourself, you'll confirm. A motorbike is the lyrical expression of the internal combustion engine and cannot be domesticated, right?
I entirely, completely disagree. It seems to me a motorbike's the acme of respectability. responsibility. It seems to me to proclaim all the wild freedom of Kensington Gardens. I can imagine a lust for speed and a lurch for the open road of those who, unprotected, go recklessly behind the wheels of Morris miners and such destroyers of the peace of the world. But surely the motorbike is to the car what the Shetland pony was to the four-in-hand.
If you've got half an hour to wait, I'll work that one out. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah, carry on.
If you what you think of when you see a motorcycle is not a sort of tiger or a leopard or some image of speed and strength, but of an armadillo, because it's a creature wholly compassed with protective mechanisms. It looks like an American footballer, than which there is nothing in nature more ridiculous. You only have to look at a bike. It's got an outside skeleton, like a beetle, the poor beetle that we tread upon. And if you know any bikers, you will know that they're the most innocent, demure, gentle people in the world. And you may say, but they take all their aggression out on the motorbike. Not at all. It is the motorbike that confers on them its own placidity.
I'm not too sure whether you've got one or whether you haven't. I know you got that. You told me you got the jacket. I mean, I saw you in the jacket, but the bike, where's the bike? No.
Sounds like a sidecar man to me.
I must pick up, Stephen, on your equine analogy there, but only in order to disagree with you. I think the nearest thing that we have that helps to explain the glamour and excitement of the motorbike and why it can never be respectable is it is the very closest thing we have to the magnificent battle charger. You don't drive a motorbike, you ride it, don't you? And the man on board in all his protective clothing and his helmet is like a knight. And the girl perched on the back clinging on is the damsel, and all those connotations of danger and excitement and thrill, that they are the exposure, as you say, the exposure to danger. We're saying the man on the motorbike says, I am a threat to you because I am going fast and I am noisy, and at the same time I'm exposing myself to danger because I am not surrounded by this tin can like the ordinary mundane
motorist. Been on a few pillions in your time?
I have been on one or two pillions in my time.
This is all very...
Good lass.
This is all very now-centred. I mean, I think you're absolutely right about the motorbike now, but I can remember something Laurie referred to just now in the 1950s. It was the time of the motorbike and the sidecar. Exactly. You could not have had a more respectable image. I remember all these people, mortgage-paying, utterly respectable people, going around the countryside, picking wildflowers, sitting in their motorbike combinations. Yeah. And the other image that comes to mind is the one you all know perfectly well when you go to France. Very old ladies dressed in black on their motorbikes with the baguettes strapped to the back. I mean,
they order these things quite differently in France.
Yes. Nicholas is quite right, of course. I mean, we've spent a lot of time on this programme drawing very, very careful distinctions between car owners and Volvo owners. I mean, we've always said that there are very, very different sorts of people to be seen in different types of cars. And Nicholas's reference to the British motorcycle enthusiast, the father of three who rides Triumphs and the BSA and the Royal Enfields and the Brough Superior, the person with the goggles and bell staff, the baggy waterproof clothing, the long scarves, the tin hats covered in leather. That particular person is still there and has been there for years and years and can't simply be absorbed or appropriated into this Hell's Angel, Harley Davidson monster that Bob is producing.
You're quite wrong. I have a point to make there about the Hell's Angels and the Harley Davidson and all like that. My point is that the motorbike is the solo instrument. It is the way that the young person roars around the suburb proclaiming that he doesn't give a hoot for his mum, his dad, the world, the universe. And I have a little coda, just a tiny one. Only a wee one, just a teeny weeny one. About the Hell's Angels. Do not join those poor, insanitary, bearded has-beens that the press... I'm surprised that Laurie calls them Hell's Angels. It's the press that flatter them. Scaly, shuffling Herberts dressed in old rhino skin. I mean, they essentially come together for, as though there was some kind of awful male voice choir. I repeat, it is the heroic solo that the motorbike represents. I have finished.
You're merely emphasising my thesis that, in fact, the motorbike is the most respectable of things. Norman Tebbit, the staunchest upholder of family values in the country, he tells us to get on his bike, and why he tells us to get on our bikes is because he remembers the sidecar so obviously improvised from a fish kettle and a goldfish bowl, and as thus an example of English family life at its best. Where would the motorbike be without the sidecar?
Yes, but let us not forget
you
the
haven't
Lambretta.
Seen a sidecar in 20 years. By the way. Sorry, Sarah.
No, not at all. I was just going to say that even we were talking about France came into the conversation, but let's not forget Italy. One of the most joyous sights in Italy usually is the young man completely free of the protective clothing and the helmet, riding around on his Lambretta, pausing at a corner, the ragazza jumps on, side saddle always, and off they go, weaving and nipping in and out of the traffico bestiale, off for a bit of nookie in the olive groves. Lovely. Again, it is different and yet the same. It is freedom and sexuality and fun, and you cannot tame the motorbike.
Do you remember those curious little offsprings of motorbikes in the 50s called Vespers?
Yes.
And they were often ridden by, what shall I say, girls who were about to become spinsters, it seemed to me. But, hadn't quite become spinsters. But such was the design of the machine, well was it called Vespers, sounds like some sort of service in a church, that they had to keep their knees very primly together. And, paradoxically, I can only say that inspired impure thoughts in the onlooker.
Yes, and they sat upright, didn't they? Very upright.
What an appalling piece of projection. He gives this a desperately unreasonable account of these people riding around happily on their Vespers and Lambrettas, says that these people are going to become spinsters, and then declares his own erotic thoughts which are aroused by them. Did these people ever stand a chance?
I've got a little battle on at the minute with various daughters of mine against the motorbike. Now, Sarah, they're all young.
Well, they're trying to get you to stop riding it.
Would that they did.
Well,
I'm trying to stop them getting lifts in it. Now, it seems to me that...
you never stamp that out. Not in Littlehampton, you won't.
I can see what you mean about this sort of romantic, Cinzano and Vespa sort of image. But the fact of the matter is that motorbikes are noisy. They're incredibly dangerous. Yes. Now, I've never owned a motorbike. I've only travelled about, I suppose, 300 miles on a motorbike. I've fallen off 3 times. And once, I think I was very nearly killed. Now, this may not be the moment to introduce this note of urgency, but I'm not against old people riding motorbikes. I'm against everybody riding motorbikes.
The word noise in your remarks, then, is the key factor. If you could take away the noise of the motorbike, you would stop people getting so anxious about it. That is what provides the element of aggression and ferocity. Talk about the snarl, the roar, the whine.
That is why they came into being.
And
they really want to, apart from giving you a good time in the way of rushing through the air, and it's rather exhilarating, they just want to make everyone else rather anxious. But we've had quite enough about motorbikes so far, I think. What we're going to have now is a jolly good song, more or less bearing on our next topic. And Dillie calls it I'd Rather Be a Kangaroo.
On the day I kick the bucket, it won't vex me in the least. I shall pop my clogs with certainty, for I know that I'll return in the form of a beast, and I've chosen the animal I want to be. If I've got to come back a second time, I think I'd rather be a kangaroo. I quite agree a panda or a tiger would be grander, but they'll either all have died out or be living in a zoo. If I chose to be a crocodile or gator, my power would undoubtedly be far, far greater, but it would be a snag if I got turned into a bag, so I'd rather be a kangaroo. If I've got to return to this valley of tears, I'd like to jump about the bush all day. For as a pig I'd just be pork on the prongs of someone's fork. If I was destined for the oven, I'd be very far from gay. As a rhino I'd be hunted for my horn. As a pheasant I'd be shot by someone frightfully nobly born. And as an insect I'd be sprayed. As a pussycat I'd be spayed. So I'd rather be a kangaroo. So when I shuffle off this mortal coil, a marsupial would get my vote. As a wildebeest I'd hate not being able to migrate, and as a mink I'd doubtless end up as Imelda Marcos's coat. As a butterfly I'd probably be collected. As a gibbon or macaque I might be horribly vivisected. As a fish I'd die in pain from the effects of acid rain, so I'd rather be a kangaroo. Or for an animal of distinction there are worse things than extinction. Yes, I'd rather be a kangaroo. With all this fallout to inhale, you'll be much safer in Australia. Yes, I'd rather be a kangaroo.
book.
Great stuff. And Dillie was singing about animals there, or a particular one. And Laurie is going to improve that theme, I think. You're not going to sing, though.
No. I rather hope that we haven't got any people around this table who are as unimaginative as Victor Borger or Peter Hall or Terence Stamp. People, that is, who, when approached by Fleur Cowles on behalf of the World Wildlife Foundation and asked if you could be reincarnated as an animal, what would it be and why, people who simply refuse to play. It's true that some of those who did send in their reply to her People as Animals collection were less than poetic in their insights. Even the most anthropomorphic reader will soon weary of the school of sinewy, playful dolphins, Bonnie Angelo, Tessa Kennedy, Julian Pettifer, not to mention the megalomaniac flock of soaring eagles, Philip Bobbitt, Gail Honeycutt, and Yehudi Menuhin. I think the real interest in the book, if there's any, comes on those animals when animals are being sought out more as a disguise, a way of getting a malicious or mendacious vantage point on humans. So Viscount Macmillan's splendid idea of being a mosquito inside an enemy's mosquito net. Or Peter Ustinov at drama school, surrounded by boys being macho tigers, but insistent on being a salamander, in which role he lay perfectly still for 4 months, an expression of permanently glazed surprise on my face, occasionally flicking my tongue out to show I was alive. Now, in such stories, and they're rare here, animals are not simply elaborations of one's own physical qualities, but alternative psychological states. Metaphors, like my own childhood desire to be a beaver, not for the teeth or for the fur or the swimming ability, but according to Alison Uckley, no other animals, let alone humans, ever quite understood why beavers lived as they did. It's because it raises the possibility of a mere aspect of one's consciousness being a whole way of life that identification with animals can be so enticing. But after those higher thoughts, Bob, would you like to tell us about your Robin?
Certainly. No, Robinson. I don't want to be him. I love feeding him, but I want to say this. I want to say that I don't want to be an animal of any sort, for all sorts of reasons. I suppose first because they all seem to be in captivity. Even when they're in the wild, they seem to be blindly at the mercy of their instinctual drives. I mean, they kill, they make love, they drink, they eat, but never choose to do it. They do it, always having to do it, in obedience to the call of their blood, and I think it's a terrible servitude. And the only fantasy that I indulge in is when I'm watching the telly and there's one of those nature programs on, and I'm watching a lion in the wild and watching him pull down and kill his prey, and I fantasize being the prey. And I think to myself, there's nothing would reach him, no cry for mercy, no promise of ransom, no cajoling, no debate, no persuasion, no nothing of that. Devices which always stand a chance, however slight, with the greatest and nastiest tyrant in the world, because you can speak to them. There was always a chance, but with the lion, nothing. And the horror is followed by the thought that if the lion is called the king of beasts, it's a pretty hollow title, because he's as much enthralled to his instincts as the merest computer is to its own program. So I wouldn't know. I mean, God bless you, wanting to be a beaver.
No, but I totally agree with you, and I thought there was a very nervous, facetious tone to this rather dull book, and I think it must be the only book in the world where the contribution of the Duke of Edinburgh was in fact the best of the lot, because in his preface he said he really wouldn't want to be an animal, because on the whole he'd hate to be a member of a threatened species and to find no mates and this sort of thing, and he said the way human treats animals, it makes it very unattractive to be an animal these days, and the only animal he could ever contemplate coming back as is as a deadly virus.
I'm afraid I am to sort of wildlife what Clark Gable is to Scarlett O'Hara. Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, really, about what happens to animals. I think the fascinated horror that you watch at wildlife programs is not in this Beatrix Potter way of discovering the viciousness of the lion attaching its prey. It's more that extrapolating back onto our own animal devices is how very much of our own mechanisms are mechanical, and all our how 90% perhaps of the things we do are not controlled, as Bob would have us believe, by the will, and it gives a horrible plausibility to the theory of behaviourism.
Come back to that.
I couldn't understand, just coming back to something that Laurie mentioned earlier, I couldn't understand the obsession with dolphins. We know, all right, that they seem to smile, and surely that's anthropomorphism gone mad, and anyway, it's now been proved that they hate jumping through hoops, and we know that they have bigger brains than us, but what the hell it must be to be a brainy, articulate creature with none of the perks. I think think if we must elect to come back as an animal, let us go the whole hogs. Let us welcome with open arms all the things we despise animals for. Let's be free of conscience and scruple, without imagination. Let's be idle, vicious, perfectly adapted to one chosen environment, only plagued by lust when the right signals are sent out. I suggest that a crocodile, with its strength, power, longevity, and amazing digestive system, I mean, when they open crocodiles, they find sort of old oil drums inside, might be ideal.
So we have established in the last sort of 5 minutes that animals are different from human beings, and therefore being an animal would mean a loss of certain rather fundamental human characteristics which we'd miss. Fine. Can we just go on and say, it seems to me that the reason why it's interesting to imagine oneself as an animal, mainly, which I was trying to sort of say when I opened this discussion, was that it raises the question of different modes of apprehension of the world. Our reliance upon the animal world for metaphors, the amount of use, the recourse that we have to the animal world, suggests that animals stand in certain ways for human feelings and emotions. They capture them in a way that there are particular postures, particular structures, particular animals which stand better than we are able to express.
Yes,
our relationship with the animal world, of course,
No,
let me just say one other thing.
Of course you could.
Our relationship with the animal world is always a matter for cultural change. It varies. Now there is this nasty appropriation, this zookeeping mentality in which we're always looking after them.
What I'm doing, and I don't know how I can be blamed for it, is absolutely, since the subject crops up, rejoicing that I'm a man and not an animal. Yes, and I'll offer the reasons. I've offered a few, and I have a few more yet.
I think it's a very delicate one, this, because I rather respect the admiration for animals, in the sense that it's reaching out towards some aesthetic. You talk about bird song. It's a non-human thing, and you're admiring it precisely because it is not human. That's fine. But it's if you start thinking that the birds are actually enjoying the song as well, and you'd like to sing it, that's what's wrong. You can like the process, but not the thing that does it, because as we all know, birds singing in the morning are really saying, please keep off, or much stronger than that, keep off my twig, it's mine, and if you come in there, I'm going to peck your eyes out.
It seems to me there are two different things. One is the animal that we identify with on some completely ridiculous level, like I think Dillie Cooper says she identifies with a sort of tail-wagging mongrel who constantly wants a pat on the head and so on, and I feel very, very much the same about it. And there's something else which we feel, which is just, as somebody said earlier, one aspect of that particular animal which we would like at one particular moment. We might, for instance, very much like to be the eagle when we're stuck in a traffic jam. We might, at a very boring cocktail party, long to be a tarantula so that we could clear the room in 5 minutes. But all of this, as Nicholas was saying, we're really stripping the creatures that we are professing to admire of their dignity by just relating them to us.
Let me just say the very famous Lawrence poem, Snake, which says much better than I can what I'm trying to talk about. I'm talking about a form of relationship, a form of imagination of what it is like to be an animal. Now, the last lines of Snake, as I remember them, are that when Lawrence has thrown the stick, even though he's given a description of the particular way in which the snake came out, I can remember the beginning of it and the middle, but I remember at the end he said, I had something to expiate, a pettiness. In other words, he's talking about the fact that having known and recognised the independence of the snake during the account of that poem, at the end, by throwing the stick, he simply destroyed this particular relation, turned it into something banal. It is a poem which honours both sides, which allows a human being to imagine what it is like to go down into that fearful hole, into the earth, into the hot Sicilian earth that he's describing, and it's also one in which he becomes a man again and breaks the relationship.
Well, that's a poet. What you're describing, if I may say so, is the processes of a poet when he writes a poem. There is no way in which anyone can imagine what a snake feels.
It's much more how we think of ourselves in relationship to animals, not the idea that you've got to do it. Now, I think that poem of Lawrence is a very good one.
I
always thought that pettiness was because he actually missed the snake. But he's not actually saying, I want to be a snake. But let's take a cliche.
No. Pettiness is throwing the stick.
Well, all right then. But let's take a cliche, the black horse that advertises Lloyd's Bank. Now, here's a horse galloping along, mane blowing like a Delacroix painting romantically in the wind. That's all right. But of course, if you then said, if you go to Lloyd's Bank and all your bank managers are going to look a bit like horses and be as intelligent as horses, that wouldn't work at all. So in other words, what you're doing is you're, in a way, not thinking of the horse at all. You're disrespecting it. You're taking one superficial aspect, but you're showing that you've got no real feeling for the real horse at all.
He's absolutely right. The horse on the advertisement is not a real horse. It's got nothing to do with the horse. It's got everything to do with advertising and our perceptions of things and the way we project ourselves. We have no relationship with animals unless we're actually with them in the wild. I once was, yes, as a boy in Africa in the bush, went out with an old gnarled, a hunter man to look for leopard. I'm very delighted to tell you we didn't find leopard. Note that I leave out the definite article, just to show I'm an old mountain man too. But what we did see, just about 50 yards away, was a whole pack of blue-arse baboons, and I didn't need the look on the face of the old hunter man to know that there was no question of parley or relationship. What we did was sneak away very quietly indeed because we were frightened to death. So there is no question of having a relationship with a wild animal. You can't have it.
But you misunderstand what you're talking about relationship like some 60s hippie, as though it meant some sort of like emotional getting together or something. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a relationship. What I mean is whether or not it is one of respect for the other person. We were talking about symbiosis and ziziggy before. I'm now using it again, but as a relationship which leaves, I think, in ziziggy, the two things standing, with their own natures, unperturbed by the fact of talking about the associations between the two. And it's
I did follow that, but you'll never be able to put it to any kind of use or satisfaction unless you come into contact.
Everywhere in the world you go, you can look. If you read anthropology, you'll find account after account of the way in which particular tribes throughout the world regard animals, whether or not they are seen as, in fact, carrying something about divinity, carrying stories about nature, whether or not, in fact, they are friends. There is nearly always, for example, an interstitial animal, which is half human and half animal, which acts as an intermediary between the humans and the animals. It's a very complicated set of relationships. The one we have at the moment in this country at this time is a very specific one.
But it's an intensely parochial concern because you speak because you read and you experience these things through the television or books or whatever. The tribe you speak of are actually in contact with them and need this species of relationship. Or what we're doing, our contact is almost nil. We see it on the television.
Killing them and putting them on the table and eating them is a relationship.
If you do that, but then a lot of people don't.
One of the functions of animals is to create a whole area of the imagination which explains to us the way that our lives work. Think of the unicorn, think of the basilisk, think of the pelican, think of the fish.
You're mixing up, where's the unicorn?
Well, exactly. The unicorn and the basilisk are extrapolations of what we fear or hope about animals, animal nature. The pelican becomes feeding on its young. The ichthus becomes the initials of Christ.
What's wrong with what Stephen is saying is that these images are certainly very powerful, but they're bad ones because they're nearly always based on ignorance. The pelican does not peck its chest in order that it's some little one from feeding his blood. It's pecking for
ignorance got to do with it?
It's a very bad day when human beings think they do better if they were animals. We've got to work at being human, and it's no good taking a completely sentimental and wrong images of animals and somehow thinking that's what we should be like. It's evading all the really important questions.
It's not what we should do. Every single question of symbolism, of the invocation of animals in order to aid our own imagination, every single way in which they have appeared in legend and myth and religion, every single way in which throughout the world relationships with them have been ways of talking about ourselves should be disregarded because Nicholas, in his rationalistic way, has decided that we are so superior they're not worth bothering.
No. Let me say this because we really can have to end, or it could go on forever. Yes, a phrase of my own comes to mind. in the light of what Laurie said. We never open our mouths, but we speak of ourselves. This is a one-way relationship. All I'm doing is rejoicing in that. Of course, it's ridiculous. How can I be an animal? I mean, I would be sort of earthbound if I thought it were possible. But I rejoice that I'm not for a moment, because although men choose to indulge in all the horrors that they choose to indulge in, the very exercise of the choice towards the horror implies its possible opposite, whereas the animal kills, never for fun, which is what men do. The animal kills, but it cannot avoid killing. It can only go on doing it. And I'll say this, if I'm coming back, which I hope I won't, I'll come back as, what shall I say, a cabbage or something, or preferably a number 19 bus.
Sarah Harrison, Stephen Oliver, Nicholas Tucker and Professor Laurie Taylor were stopping the week with Robert Robinson. Dillie Keane of Fascinating Aida provided the musical interlude, and the programme is produced by Michael Ember.